So we're now streaming live on Facebook and on other channels. Welcome everyone to this keynote industry event with amazing panelists, Thandi Davids, MATHIEU BÉJOT, and Brian Newman, coming from this continent, from Europe, and from North America. So as we get through this, I just want to say thanks to all the sponsors who make encounters possible. Thanks for, in this case, IFAS, the French Institute, for highlighting Mathieu's Sunny Side of the Docks presentation, and yeah, allowing us to have an amazing opening night film that was streamed live and had a great Q&A and had a drive-in up in Joburg, and our producer Thandi Davids is here to talk about that and other things. And of course, Brian in New York, he's gonna give us a lot of advice that he's been writing about, and I'm very excited that all three of you managed to join us in this this view of doc in the COVID and post-COVID society. So just to kick off, can I just have Thandi say hello, and then we'll move clockwise, Brian and Mathieu, just to say hi so everybody can hear your voices, and tell us a little bit about yourself. And if you forget, or if you're too humble, I'm going to pick up the ball where you dropped it. Thandi, over to you.
Hi, I'm Thandi Davids. I'm an executive producer at a production house called StoryScope, which produces both fiction and First Love documentaries. I come from a television background. I used to run National Geographic in Africa, and before that had a fairly long career in media. I've been a bit of here and a bit of there, all over the place, and now I make films for a living, and try and work as closely as I can with as many industry bodies to make sure our industry is thriving and functioning.
Brian, over to you.
Great, thanks for having me here. My name's Brian Newman. I'm here from New York City, and I produce both documentaries and narrative feature films, and I also do a lot of consulting with brands that are now making films. So a lot of big corporations that are now funding mainly documentaries, but also narrative films. And I write a newsletter called Subgenre, where I've been writing a lot recently about what's happening with COVID-19 and its effects on the industry. And I think that's how we met, and I ended up getting invited to this. So I'm glad to join the conversation.
Monica, your mic is off, but I guess it's my turn. So, hi everyone, I'm MATHIEU BÉJOT. I'm based in Paris. I'm director of development and strategy for Sunny Side of the Dock, the documentary market that takes place in France and that celebrated its 31st edition in June. Very unusual edition, and we'll talk about it as it was online only. And I also have my own consulting company working on international distribution, PR, marketing. In particular, I work with an association of Japanese broadcasters to help them with export strategy for Japanese content. And I've been in the market for quite a while, having run TV France International, which is an association of French TV program exporters for 18 years before I quit a couple of years ago.
This is great, and I'm going to keep my mic on. But I just want the audience to know that this panel is allowed to answer questions anytime they see an exciting question posted in our Q&A box. At the moment, there are no open questions, but I think I need to start and say you're all very humble, but I think we've spoken enough about what each other does. But what I'd like to do is now go back, if you don't mind, because we're in a festival environment and COVID has caused a lot of festivals to go online. And Mathieu, Sunny Side of the Dock is a marketplace. It was one of the first that had to migrate very quickly onto the virtual environment. And then we'll go to Thandi, and I want to ask her, what was it like to, because your film has been going from Sundance to other places, plus you have other films in the market, as a producer with a film on the circuit. And finally we'll end up in Brian, because Brian, you're going to give us that strategy look, and you're going to use what our other guests have said to maybe to do a little bit of a wrap on this round of questions. So over to you, Mathieu.
Thank you. Yeah, so Sunnyside is held in June. It's a market, as you said, not a festival. Every year it gathers about 2,000 professionals from all over the world. A lot of them from Europe. We're based in Europe, but people coming from Asia, from North America, some from Africa, Latin America as well. Obviously, we had to decide fairly early on that we would go digital. I mean, basically in March when we realized what the lockdown was, how effective it was in many different countries, we realized there was no way we could have a physical event. We still waited a little bit, like everybody else did, in the hope that we could have maybe a smaller on-site event. But very early on, we realized that was just impossible. So there began a big challenge. How do you switch a market online? How do you make sure that you are relevant for the industry? And the challenge is multifaceted. It's an editorial challenge. What is your DNA? What is interesting for the audience? Especially when you have to think in advance. I mean, we basically started devising the event, recreating the event in March, not knowing how people would react to an online event 3 months later. So you have to make assumptions, you have to take some guesses again. So one part is the editorial part. Of course, if you look at the details, you also have to think about how much money you can invest without knowing how much you can charge, who's going to be willing to pay anything to follow an online market, whether your public or private sponsors are going to keep sponsoring you in a very unusual year. Then you have to look at all the technical side as well. What kind of tools do you use? Do you use Zoom? Do you use other tools? And basically everybody's starting to do a job that is not his or hers, because nobody is a technician in the team, and yet everybody had to look at different tools and see the advantages and the disadvantages, comparing all the available options. And then, as I said, you have to take care of the financial and the commercial part as well. So in just 3 months, that's quite a challenge. I have to admit that the very good news for us was the level of commitment from the industry. We had excellent response from both sponsors, participants, and the message that we keep getting was, we need this market. We need to, if you're a producer, we need to be able to present programs to commissioning editors, to buyers. We need their feedback. Sure, it's going to be online, but we absolutely need to keep things going, because when everybody's working from home, you feel very isolated. You don't get the same kind of response you have when you attend a market. So we knew from the start that there was absolutely no way we could cancel. We had to do it for the industry, and the industry really supported us in that way.
That's really great. And I think we're going to come back to some of those points you raised, because the DNA of Sunnyside is quite vast and important in the documentary field. It's the largest and the most important documentary festival market in France. And it's one reason why IFAS suggested you attend this one, because documentaries in this country are represented by encounters. And there are a lot of industry events that normally would be taking place where we would have face-to-faces. And I think, Thandi, your film influence started in a number of these markets over the years. You can maybe tell a little bit about how you experienced going to those kinds of markets when you were producing this film that was the opening night, but also touch on what it's like to be in a virtual festival, please.
Whoa. Well, we were incredibly fortunate. We had our world premiere at Sundance, so we were physically on site and had the opportunity to talk to distributors and to broadcasters and to put ourselves out there. And literally think I got on a plane at the beginning of February, and that was it. So we were told, well, the world's changed. How are we going to go about marketing this film? We went under a hard lockdown in March. Our cinema distribution deal went up in smoke. Which was very disappointing for us. And it was a big deal. We very, very rarely in South Africa do docs get a cinema release. So we were super excited that we had a documentary that was going to have a limited cinema release, but a cinema release anyway. And that went up in smoke. And we had to re-engineer and rethink how are we going to manage this, which festivals are going online, how do we manage our marketing from that perspective, and how do we move on. When it came to coming back home, this film starts from home and travels around the world and ends at home. as a film, it was really important for us that we had to get this out into the marketplace. We worked very hard with Encounters to decide how to do that, to almost try and have the same kind of feel that you do when you have a market, when you have a film festival that you can physically go to. Our opening night was, for example, digitally was by invite only. It's the same kind of feeling that you have when you have your premiere. We had a really great Q&A and had more people come into the Q&A afterwards than what they were at the screening because of the number of limited listings. But the key thing for us was we just felt highly disappointed at not being able to have a premiere where we could see the film on a big screen. So we worked quite hard and set up a drive-in cinema, which was fantastic and a lot of fun. I think the only thing we were missing were our waiters on roller skates. And it was great to be able to see everyone with their masks on, wave at each other. It was fantastic to have the response of cars hooting at the beginning of the film and the end of the film. So it kind of gave us that sense of actually really having had a premiere, but doing it in a way that fits within our COVID environment now. It's also meant that we've had a relook how quickly we get the film out to audiences. So we are doing a number of festivals here. We go from Encounters to DIF, and from DIF to GRIF, which is the Garden Route Festival. And then in discussions with our broadcaster, wanted to really, for the first time, I think ever, have the opportunity of being able to come out of festival and all the marketing and the news reports and be able to go straight into broadcast. So we're hopefully aiming to have the film on television by the end of October, which means that for us, we've almost had this very different way of having to market and a much quicker way of actually getting it out to our audiences than what we would have in a normal environment. So there's been learning curves, and it's been a bit of fun as well to get us through the process.
Thanks, Thandi. That's a very positive spin on what must have been a very difficult journey, but I'm so glad you had your Sundance premiere, and congratulations. It's an amazing film. Brian, I know you've been writing on so many of these subjects. I think there's some best practice there and some ideas that maybe you want to bring out as we could do better.
Yeah, well, I think what Thandi just mentioned, that it's been a learning curve, is the most accurate statement. We're all in the middle of this and learning what's working and not working. And as festivals have been moving online in markets, they've been learning and things have been getting stronger. A lot of people had to move very quickly and they just had to do what they could. And now we're starting to see things kind of settle into some norms, I guess. And we're figuring out what works and what doesn't. But I think I've got one narrative film that was premiering at Tribeca that got canceled, and about 10 client films that were documentaries. And every documentary that I'm working on, its trajectory has been completely different. It depends on the broadcaster or SVOD partner and what they want to do. Some are very open to playing a lot of virtual fests and drive-ins. Others want their films to only premiere on their home channel, and they're not as open to the virtual world. So we've been having to make decisions on a case-by-case basis, country-by-country basis. There's no blanket rules anymore. And a lot of things that you could count on a Nat Geo or a Netflix agreeing to in the past, they're not doing now. So it's been very different. But I think one thing we've been learning for sure is that markets and meetings definitely work. People can go to markets and view films and decide what they're interested in taking to the marketplace or acquiring or commissioning. People can do meetings and do more of them than they could before, and you don't have to worry about traveling around the world and trying to set up these meetings. People are more willing to take meetings that they wouldn't take a chance on in person. So those have been great. On the other hand, some of the things as filmmakers that we most love, like being in front of an audience, are still missing. And the experience of trying to participate in virtual Q&As or doing pre-recorded Q&As, it's what we're having to do now, but it's not the best situation. And it's not what any filmmaker really wants. We really want to show our films in front of an audience before it goes on to broadcast or to a SVOD partner. And another thing we're learning is that while audiences are showing up, those film festivals that are reporting, it's a mixed bag. You'll see a lot of people logging in and watching 14 minutes of a movie and then logging off. And, you know, you're just not seeing the same level of participation with a lot of places. People will sign up because they want to support the festival, but they're not participating at the same numbers that we're used to. And so for filmmakers, that can sometimes be tough. But with a lot of documentaries, you know, we're of the moment and timely, and we want to have an impact. And so we just kind of have to go with the flow and learn as we go and do what we can to have the best impact that we can in this environment.
That's a great round. Thanks, everybody. I'm coming back to Sunnyside now, because curation is a big part of a market and a festival, and world-class films have to be selected, and then maybe you're not allowed to distribute it because of whatever reason the broadcaster at the end doesn't want to release it. So, but in your case, it's curating projects and getting them ready for market. That's really your unique DNA. And you said you had over 300, maybe closer to 400 projects submit. You picked more and helped coach them and get them ready. And somehow you felt that actually worked a bit better because they prepared their pitches more professionally. They didn't have those fumbling moments because they were recorded, what have you. But did you also look at a different kind of curation? Were you looking at more projects that could move more quickly, or just tell us a little bit about how your unique DNA changed in this COVID world, please?
Well, as you said before, our DNA is pretty vast, but as far as the pitching sessions are concerned, that's really one of the key elements for Sunnyside. I don't think the kind of projects we selected really changed from what we used to select in the previous years, because we really have in mind, and we use you know, a panel of specialists, producers, distributors, broadcasters to select the projects. We really have in mind what may appeal to broadcasters or SVOD platforms, as long as they do international production, of course. So we're looking at films that have a potential for international co-production in the specialist factual area. So I don't think we really changed the kind of projects we selected. We do have some criteria. We need a certain amount of financing already secured, because we want to make sure the projects we select are viable. So they need to have at least, you know, a broadcaster on board or a partner on board. So we didn't really change our editorial line, but as you said, we did manage to make sure the projects were well groomed. And in fact, a lot of producers were happier about the formula, because some of them are not that keen on, you know, walking on stage and addressing a huge auditorium. I mean, I agree with Brian, you want to meet your audience, but when you're a producer pitching a program, it can be a bit intimidating to have a huge auditorium. So recording online also can be intimidating. I mean, 6 months ago, very few people were used to pitching to a PC or you know, a webcam, basically, and that's what you have to do when you're by yourself in your office or at home. So we really paid attention to mentoring the producers that were selected, so that we could have pictures that were efficient, pleasant to watch. We know, as I agree with Brian, the attention span online is more limited, so you need to get right to the point very quickly. And I think we had some pretty good feedback on that, because we did a lot of preparation to make sure the pitching sessions would be fast, entertaining, and useful for both the producer and the commissioning editors.
Great. And Thandi, maybe you can follow up on that, because your experience of taking meetings online, trying to secure the next step for not just this film, but maybe some of your other projects. I know you do quite a lot of other work in a branded space, similar to what Brian is doing. You know, you've got quite a big team up there. And what's changed for you in this COVID world, this post-COVID? Well, we're supposedly post-COVID, but yeah. Just tell us a little bit, maybe aligned with the pitches, and remember to unmute your mic.
Yeah, just doing that. I think what's interesting is you know, for us using this period to develop new films and develop new ideas, and our films always tend to have a much broader view than just South Africa. So it's about trying to find people who you can work with across the continent, across the globe, which you would probably find easier if you're going to markets and you're going to festivals. Your engagement of bumping into someone at a bar and going, okay, wow, you're perfect, you know, is a lot easier than having to sit down and now figure out how am I going to try and find someone in New York to do this research for me. I've now got to really do a lot more homework and think a lot more about how I'm going to go about doing this. Just that kind of engagement, literally having to start processes with directors online, with teams that are sitting in different countries. So there is a different way of looking at it, but on some levels it's also been easier. I mean, finding people and the resources has been slightly harder, but being able to engage on certain levels has been a little bit easier at the same time. So they're pros, they're cons, they're difficulties. I think where the big issues coming for us has actually been on the sales and distribution side. COVID's really impacted the sales of films and how broadcasters and SVOD platforms are engaging with buying content and how long that is taking. You know, as I said, you have a clear idea that you want to go for cinema release, and then you want to do this, and then you want to do that, and you've now cut out a very large part of what is your campaign, but you've also then got broadcasters and SVOD platforms re-engineering themselves as well. You know, we look at broadcasters here and they'll tell you that they're losing money. They've got to rethink on how they're capturing and keeping their audiences. And what may have been a project that fit in wonderfully 9 months ago is no longer such. You know, and a discussion I was having in January with the distributor is no longer that discussion. So I think that side of things as well has been an impact, and trying to understand, I think, from the entire value chain, how you manage that is still an ongoing lesson for all of us on the sales end of what we're doing with our films.
Thanks, Thandi. As Brian follows up on that with ideas that I'm sure are just popping, because he's an ideas man, we do have a question being typed into our channel there. So let's just read that, but listen to Brian.
Sure.
What do you think about this?
Well, I think Thandi just brought up a really important point, which is the sales environment has gotten very challenging and difficult. And I think for a while, all of us thought that there would be this strong need for content and that everyone would be begging for films because they were running out of things to show. But to a large degree, if you speak to sales agents from a lot of the major sales agent companies, they're saying that, you know, they had 10 or 12 films at a certain market and only 2 of them have sold. The market's been very slow and people are not moving as quickly to buy titles. Things that were commissioned or earlier co-productions, they already have a home, and those seem to be doing okay in most of those territories. But those films that were made and premiering at a Sundance or a CPH Docs and looking for a home are moving much slower. And I think that's been one of the biggest concerns. And the second is, usually when you play the festival and market circuit, you're, especially with a completed film, you're looking for a lot of buzz and PR, and it's really hard to break through the noise in this environment. And even the best festivals that have a PR department and are really helping you, it just doesn't feel like you're getting that same buzz behind the film, and it's really hard to get attention in this environment because everyone's locked down and they've got so much they're trying to do, and they're on Zoom meetings all day, and trying to find time to pay attention to what's premiering at this fest or that fest is a little bit harder than usual. So that's been the other difficulty that I've been finding.
Brian, do you want to take a stab at this question? Sharon Jackson said festivals will go back to cinemas, but a huge proportion of people are loving the digital platform. And do you think there will be an expectation going forward that both platforms will be made available? And
yeah,
we'll
okay. Definitely. I'd love to hear the other panelists' opinion, but when I speak to festival directors and market directors and audiences, everyone feels like the future is going to be hybrid, and we're definitely not going back. I think that there are wrinkles we have to work out, and there's rights issues to work out, of course, but I think, you know, the good things that come from this new online world, you know, allowing people who couldn't travel to the festival, people with disabilities who might not be able to travel to the festival, people in regions that don't have the festival but are close by and would hear about it, them being able to participate and being able to have a director zoom in from across the world and not have to fly them and worry about the carbon imprint of that, all those things. We're not going back. It'll be some kind of hybrid where we have a mix of digital and in-person, and maybe some films will only play in person and others will be both. I think it'll be a mix of all things.
Thandi, let's try you first, and then we'll go to Mathieu.
I agree. I think you know, coming from this continent where access is incredibly difficult for a lot of people, this hybrid, I do think it will become a hybrid situation. But I do see. I also sit on the Durban Film Arts Institute board, and these are discussions we're having because you effectively have African filmmakers who've never had the opportunity to arrive in Durban, but can certainly, you know, can engage from Senegal or from Burkina Faso with the film art because it is online. So I do think we're going to have to re-engage and rethink how we do that. And I very specifically think for those of us in the developing world where access is so difficult and where young filmmakers don't have the opportunity to be able to access established filmmakers from around the world, that this really is a great opportunity to kind of bring so many more people into the fold and to give exposure to so many young filmmakers, to so many Africans who would not necessarily be able to go through this process. We're very lucky as South Africans. We've got funds here that allow us to get onto planes, you know, when this does work and go to these other festivals. But for most African countries, they don't have any resourcing from a governmental perspective to be able to attend festivals and film arts. So I think that this is almost, I think for Africans, it's almost like a leapfrogging. It's kind of like, okay, wow, we now have this opportunity that we didn't have before. We can now engage and do it from the comfort of our telephone screen or the comfort of our laptop. And I think that's quite powerful and quite empowering. And I think as Africans and for those of us from the developing world, we really should look at ensuring this hybrid model remains so that we've got more people who become part of our sector and more of our stories and voices being able to be heard.
Fantastic. And over to you. I know you're just a market, but I know you have vast experience and like Brian and Thandi know a lot of different festivals. I attended Cannes, for instance, in France, but didn't have to get on a plane, and Annecy. So over to you. What's your experience? Are we going to do a virtual and combined event when we're allowed to in future?
Yeah, I think so, for all the reasons that Brian and Thandi mentioned. I mean, from ecological footprint to the impossibility sometimes to travel to a particular event, whether it's a market or a festival. For instance, we noticed that this year we had many more projects that were submitted for the pitching sessions, and from a lot of countries which we didn't hear from before. So all of a sudden, we were able to expand our reach. Having said that, the thing that I think we felt was not quite as effective at Sunnyside and most markets or festivals I've spoken to is the kind of interaction you get at regular markets. The people that are introduced to you, at a cocktail party or when you walk through the aisles of a market. And we felt that for participants who already have their network of contacts, whether they're distributors or producers, and they know the broadcasters, they know the decision makers, they didn't have too many difficulties in setting up contacts. However, for up-and-coming producers, for people who are less familiar with the international market, it is still very difficult to get some response from participants because everybody's busy. When you're at a physical event, you can dedicate 3 days, 4 days to doing meetings only or screenings. When you're attending from home, you have your email popping up, you have colleagues calling you on Zoom, you have so many other distractions that you realize the attention span is not the same, and a lot of decision makers are not as available as they would be at a physical event. So that's where I think the responsibility of festivals or markets is really to help these participants. We noticed, for instance, that all the one-on-one meetings we organize, either for the project or a pitch, or when we did some matchmaking sessions for some foreign delegations, we also had a program called Meet the Experts, where we had experts from different walks of life, from financing, production, distribution, etc. So everything that was organized by us worked pretty well. I mean, the meetings were all held. But we did hear about some people having difficulties trying to have meetings because they're not as well known. And I think it's also a key issue with a lot of projects being put on hold. I think broadcasters are becoming more and more risk averse and deciding to embark on a new project from a producer you don't know that much. Well, is he or she going to be able to deliver? How is it going to be produced with all the restrictions for traveling, etc.? So I think it's a time where it's both very exciting and a lot of opportunities for people to reach out beyond their usual circle. At the same time, we do need to help these people who are not as familiar with the market to be able to make sure they meet the relevant contact for their projects.
Great, thank you. We're getting a few more questions from our other platforms. So I'm going to start with Brian. I'm just going to read these two other questions, and then you can just fold into the conversation, because I think we heard from Thandi and Mathieu that there were quite a few other issues that were brought up from the last question. So how can online festivals incorporate distribution opportunities, especially when geo-blocking is implemented? And folding into that, what is the prognosis for films aiming to premiere in 2021? Do you think there will be a huge bottleneck? Over to you, Brian.
On the first question, I think this is going to be one of the most fascinating things to watch moving forward. Is at the time being, as of right now, most festivals have been duplicating kind of what we've been doing before, and very focused on what you would call the traditional model and the old-fashioned model of distribution. But the reality is, if you really step back and think about it, the idea of geo-blocking and the idea of everything having to be locked down to a small number of attendees and all this, just so we can preserve an old-fashioned way of doing distribution, is kind of silly in some points. So I think it would be interesting to see. Not every festival can do this, and not every film would be able to participate. But I do think that certain festivals that have a brand that has kind of gotten known within a certain country or in a certain sector of the world, a certain region, or even globally, there's opportunities for them to be able to kind of merge festival premieres and distribution for certain films. And it's going to be not easy to work that out because of different rights issues. But a lot of films, they're not getting picked up for major distribution anyways. And so if we could figure out a way that compensates filmmakers appropriately and still allows the festivals to survive and thrive, but expand what they're doing, I think it'll be an amazing opportunity for certain films. I also think that the second question, we're all going to learn together whether or not the film's premiering in 2021, if there's going to be a bottleneck. My personal hunch right now is that we're going to still have this hybrid festival situation where we're doing a mix of virtual, in-person, drive-ins. It's going to be different from every country, but there's been a significant slowdown in production. There's been people pulling off productions, but there's also been a significant slowdown. So in theory, there should be less of a bottleneck and more opportunities for these films to be able to premiere to an audience, because in theory, we should need a lot of these films in a market where there's been less production going on, I would hope.
Thanks, Brian. So Thandi, when you answer your take on these questions from both the filmmaker, your producer hat, and you probably still have friends as broadcasters and at other festivals, and you're on the board at Durban Film Art, try to just tease something out here. What do you think? Put on your crystal ball future eyes and just let us know what you're thinking will be happening. And obviously you can't talk about projects you're producing. You're very focused on a big film right now, but you know, both you and Brian do branded content. So, I mean, we also have to recognize that keeping the lights on for documentary filmmakers often require working at multiple jobs. So feel free to bring that in as well, because maybe your way of dealing with getting commercials out there has changed as well because of COVID. And, commercials are about our life. I mean, we're trying to share things through the noise. So go wild. Tell us about the future.
We don't do much commercial work now. We do commission work, but not much commercial as an advertising space work at all. I think that the key thing of interest is on the commissioning side. We as a production house try to be as independent as possible. So we try and develop our own work and start from the beginning and find a distributor towards the end of the process, as opposed to taking commissions on at the outset. But we still do take on commissions, and we've created some wonderful films through those. I think what's interesting is understanding the environment from a broadcasting perspective, and the fact that advertising revenue has dashed itself for broadcasters. And your commissioning starts off how much they're making. So to give you a practical example, if you are on a cable or a direct-to-home platform like a DSTV in South Africa, they've probably had a lot of people. They've probably had a lot of churn, as they call it. So a lot of people used to pay the 200 or 500 or 1,000 Rand a month to be able to get that bouquet, have over lockdown gone, can't afford it, not earning as much as I used to. I'm just going to stick to Netflix. Which means great. So I used to have 6 million subscribers. Now I've got 4 million subscribers, which means I've got less money to commission. My ad revenue is not as high. I've got less money to commission. And as frustrating as it is for producers, I think we have to learn that this is what broadcasters are going through, and how do we adjust as content makers into that reality? Does it mean that we've got to change the way we budget our films? Does it mean we've got to change the kinds of stories we're telling? These are kind of key considerations that need to be taken into place. And to go to Brian's point about what happens with festivals moving on, and if we are going to do hybrids, I do think they're going to have to we'd have to relook at how distribution works and where producers make their money. You know, a couple of years ago, if anyone had said that we'd be forking out the amount of money we are to an online streamer, we would have gone, that's crazy, it's not going to work. I want my remote control in front of me, and that's the way it's going to work. And we've adjusted. So I think as producers, we've also got to sit back and start looking at, if the cycle's being broken, how do we get to a point where we are learning how to make money for ourselves and finding windows, if I could put it that way, where we can earn revenue that we would not ordinarily have earned. And you know, maybe that is through festivals. Maybe we do say, great, just ticket sales, I want 50% of those ticket sales, as opposed to just getting a fee for showing the film. These are discussions that I think we're going to have as producers as the world changes. So we have to change at how we take control of our distribution mechanisms. And I think we have to look at younger people. You know, there are a lot of young filmmakers who are out there on YouTube monetizing content in ways that we think is not our way. But they're doing it, you know, they're doing it. And potentially what COVID is doing is giving us the time and space to say, well, we've got to look at that new technology. And we've got to look at how younger people are utilizing free spaces for viewing and still making income off it. And let's start re-engineering ourselves around how we do that.
Brilliant. And I think our market expert here, MATHIEU, needs to follow up, please, on that round.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I really don't know how 2021 is going to look like, bottleneck or not bottleneck. What strikes me is, and it's a real question I have regarding everybody's behavior in the industry. Right now, we've tended to stick to the original calendar. Like, you know, in June, you have this market, in July, you have that festival, etc. However, I think in the coming months, because we know for sure that until the end of the year, there's not going to be any physical event. You see more and more proposals coming up, festivals, making sure, and this is a reflection we've started at Sunny Side of the Dock even before COVID. We know that nowadays you cannot just have a 4-day event once a year and then forget about everybody else for a year and start again the year after. You need to engage your community throughout the year. So you need to create new meeting opportunities. You need to create some more to give more value to the community you're engaging through your festival or your market. But that means there's more and more going on. When you look, for instance, MIPCOM is switching to a hybrid format, and you see some of the UK studios, for instance, saying that they will develop their own digital market, and it's going to last for 2 weeks instead of 4 days, because they need to engage with all their usual buyers. So you realize that on a daily basis, every day there's a new panel going on, there's a new market opportunity, there are screenings online. And I just wonder how much people can actually sustain, and whether we will still have the same pace. I mean, does Sunnyside have to happen at the end of June only? Does Encounter have to happen in August? Or will there be a kind of a continuous exchange of information, screenings, market opportunities? How much can you engage participants as well? The beauty so far of a festival of a market is really to focus all your energy during a couple of days to think only about screening films, meeting people, pushing your projects, pushing your distribution side, etc. Can you do it throughout the year? Will you have decision makers' attention? I mean, there's a lot of questions, and I honestly don't know how people are going to behave. I'm sure that after a year of not having any markets, we might start changing the pace of the industry, which right now is exactly how much traveling you're going to do, when, and to which places. If you don't need to do that, well, why do you need to have one particular event in one particular week of the year? So how is it going to help? Honestly, I really don't know, because it's too soon, and I think we're still on a learning curve, and behaviors are going to change more, I think, in the coming month. So to be continued, but I'm sure we'll see a lot of changes in 2021 anyway.
That sounds pretty prescient to me. I think you've got a very clever crystal ball, all of you. But back to Brian now. I think there's some real threads popping up, but you're a commercials guy too. Have you noticed the commercials have changed when you're speaking branded and story? And I just want to bring that in, because this isn't just COVID and docs, or COVID and festivals, or COVID and markets. The disruption or transformation is across every single industry, but we're going to move forward. We're in the fourth industrial revolution after all. We're all doing manufacturing in a new way. And every single job has been disrupted or transformed because of that. And we've just moved more quickly to this future, because I think, Mathieu, you said you were thinking about doing things next year and you had to move it forward to this year. So you were able to transfer some of your ideas for next year to this year, and they worked, thankfully. And so, Brian, over to you.
Well, first, I just want to say I agree with Mathieu that I feel like we kind of had March thinking, and then June thinking, and now we're in August, September thinking, and we're starting to expand our scope of what we think will change in the future. And I think we will see a lot more of this conversation about, well, if we don't need to have the market at this time, and if geography doesn't matter on Zoom, could there be more collaboration, and can things take place at different times or at the same time? I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens next as people start to realize this isn't going away anytime soon. It's a whole new way of doing business, and everything is changing. On the question you were just asking about the commercial front, my feeling has always been that as a producer, you need to build a sustainable career. And one piece of that, if you're very lucky, are the artistic projects you might be finding commissioned by traditional broadcasters and SVOD platforms. But as more and more brands are realizing that advertising isn't working, consumers don't like advertising, they're moving more and more into branded content, and more of them are making very genuine quality films. We have films funded by brands that have premiered at the Cannes Film Festival, that have premiered at Sundance, that have premiered at Toronto, and then gone on to play on Apple and Nat Geo and major platforms. That's another revenue stream that can help make a sustainable career. And I think it doesn't work for all films. If you're making an activist film about the carbon industry, you don't want Toyota sponsoring your project. But for certain films, it can work. And I think that as we are in this disrupted environment where traditional funding sources are going to be getting cut back, where there's going to be most likely a cutback in what different platforms are spending on content as they're getting budget cuts. We're going to see a lot of austerity measures coming forward as we go through different stages of recession and depression across the world. We really need to be open to looking at new business models and new ways of trying to build a sustainable career and a sustainable industry. And so I think all options need to be on the table.
I think that's a brilliant answer after a brilliant round. We have a question here from Solo Fellow Kwakawa. Sorry, I get nervous and my tongue twists a bit. But she appreciates the idea of a hybrid festival moving forward. Will this, however, cause a financial strain on the overall festivals? Well, I think what you just mentioned, Brian, is that every business model has been disrupted. And Thandi, you also brought that up, that the actual advertising for traditional broadcast is tanked a bit. So I think every single part of the value chain will have financial strain moving forward. But let's start with Mathieu, because you've already started your planning for next year. And what's your financial crystal ball looking like? Are you changing your business model there? And hybrid festivals, will that be cheaper, or will it give you a secondary stream with the live events? Hopefully we're allowed to do some of those more than just drive-ins.
I don't have all the answers, I'm sorry, Monica, but it's certainly a very good question, because obviously you don't incur the same cost if you go online, whether it's venue rental, whether it's, I mean, there's a lot of costs that you don't incur. At the same time, you don't get the same source of revenues either through, selling stands, selling tickets, because you're going to charge as much. So it's a complicated equation. Honestly, we were pretty lucky as well this year that most of our institutional sponsors followed us and maintained their commitment. And I think most festivals in France and Europe have had some support, and that's really helped them keep afloat. But who knows? I mean, if COVID is still around next year, if you start having hybrid festivals, will your public and private sponsors commit to the same level? Nobody knows right now. So it does change the equation, and if there's no business model that's been established yet. So you have to be very careful, because going online can be cheaper, but it also means investing in new IT solutions, and that can be extremely costly and time consuming in terms of human resources. We all know that IT projects go way overboard, they take longer than expected. So that's a very, very central issue. I don't have, once again, I'm sorry, but I don't have the answer. But I know that when organizing a festival or a market, you really have to be careful on that aspect and see how you can monetize. Because I know that, for instance, some people told us you might be a little expensive when we started promoting Sunnyside online, and we said, yeah, but there's a lot of value going into organizing it. And the first events that were very cheap then realized that maybe they were too cheap. And when you see now how markets are the price structure of online markets, everybody's pushing their prices up, because we realize that you need to balance off your accounts at the end of the day, and it is costly to organize something online. It's not just using Zoom and everything is fine. There is a cost associated with it. And how much can the industry support financing online events? I don't know. So it's a real key issue, and as Thandi said, it's probably also a matter of changing the way the revenues are shared between the various stakeholders as well. Maybe having more for festivals, more revenue going to the producers themselves instead of paying a flat fee to have films. I mean, there's so many questions that I think, once again, sorry to repeat that, but we're also still in a learning curve. And we need to find out new business models. We've been exchanging a lot with other festivals and markets, and I think that's one of the very positive takeaway from the crisis. The solidarity in the industry has been tremendous, and people are quite willing to exchange ideas and what worked well for them and what didn't work, including from a financial point of view. So I think we still need to establish new business models for festivals and markets, basically.
New business models. I think that's a huge thing that we're moving through, and it kind of defines the fourth industrial revolution. Do you have a response to fellow Sorry. Sholo Fellow's question, Thandi. Pardon me, I am tongue-tied today.
I think it's going to be interesting moving forward. I mean, I'm looking at encounters this year, and I know that, you know, the Mandisana team have worked very hard to make sure that the festival's up and running. But part of what they've had to do in order to bring audiences in is to make a lot of these films free, not all of them free, you know, so that they can pull people into the festival online and have people engage with the brand, have people engage with the festival, which they would not ordinarily do. And I think you know, they've said, well, let's look at how it works year one for free, and we'll see how it moves on into the second year. So it is about trying to figure all of this stuff out. But at the same time, this team needs to have money to make sure they're around next year. So I'm going to punt for them a little bit whilst I have the space. We've very graciously worked with them to make sure our film, which has been sold out, we're getting a third screening of Influence, and we are asking people to pay for those tickets so that we've got some money going into Encounters pockets to make sure they're up and running and they're there next year. So please book and buy your tickets for that third screening. But I think this is, and I think especially in South Africa, where audiences are quite tough and doc audiences are quite tough. You know, as I said, for us to have gotten a cinema release for our documentary was a very big deal in the first place. It is going to be a massive learning curve. And it is about having to, year one, bring in those audiences, but also make sure they know they've got to start paying for what they get. And that's going to be the next step that needs to take place in terms of how we go about doing that. And then it comes back to that question once again, you know, putting my distribution broadcasting hat on, is, do we not have geo-blocking? Do we open this up to people outside of South Africa, so, you know, onto the continent, so that we can get more income coming in from people viewing at a South African film festival? Those are the kinds of questions I think that we're going to have to look at as a sector, as producers, and as film festival owners and developers as we move forward. But as everyone says, it's a learning curve for all of us, and there are questions we all trying to work through and figure out. It's just, yeah, important that we do sustain our festivals, and we do make sure that they're there and up and running in the future. And how do we make sure that keeps on going on, especially for smaller festivals in you know, developing countries that really are incredibly important for African filmmakers to be able to showcase their work. They would not necessarily be able to get into a TIFF or anywhere else in the world at the end of the day. So yeah.
Brilliantly said. Brian, do you have something to add to that?
Well, I would just say we're going to be learning a lot as we go forward, but I would strike a little bit more pessimist note and say that I think it's going to be very tough moving forward for a lot of festivals, because this was a year where sometimes festivals were getting support from people because they just, you know, they wanted to see it move forward, and maybe they had already allotted their budgets, but there's going to be a lot of cutbacks in government support. There's going to be even more cutbacks in corporate support for those festivals. And this isn't true for every festival, but those festivals that rely on a lot of corporate sponsorship and people throwing parties and, you know, bringing big contingents out, that's just not going to be happening in the same way going forward. And a lot of people who are sending, you know, delegates to different markets and festivals, and maybe they would send 4 or 5 employees, are going to start thinking, well, do we really need to send 4 or 5 people? Maybe 1, maybe less, and we do it just virtually. And that means less money coming in, not just to the festival, but the local economy. I think there's going to be some really big shakeups. And on the positive side of that, that might lead us to a lot more collaboration and exploring new business models. But I think we're going to see some people disappear. Some have to rethink their structure because, you know, what we've been able to piece together as a kind of hybrid model in this first year of COVID, it's not very sustainable for a lot of people in the second year. And that's when we'll start seeing some real change.
Unfortunately, I think you're speaking the truth there. And Mathieu, do you want to add to that, and Thandi after that?
No, I have to fully agree with Brian. I mean, we did notice that a lot of sponsors, whether they're institutional sponsors or corporate sponsors, were also supporting us or other festivals this year because they wanted to see them through the crisis. The crisis goes on. I'm not quite sure how much money will be available because, everybody's cutting on their advertising expenses. Government have been really supportive in many countries, but how long can that last? I don't know. So there's a real risk that financially speaking, the coming year will be extremely tough for a lot of people. And as I said before, I mean, the online model still needs to be defined. Fewer costs probably, but also lower income. So how can you balance that off is still to be defined.
So I see we've lost our colleague for a moment. Maybe there was some load shedding on the top of the hour up in Joburg. But until she comes back on, I just want to say that congratulations to the Encounters team. They have national partners, other provinces. Wesgro is one of the sponsors. I head up a promotion unit there. Sundance, Western Cape Government, Sports, Arts and Culture. The Swiss are here, the French, as I mentioned, Germans, more French, radio station, Kaya FM, refinery, they do post-production here. Tishan Mani is, I think, an incubator. She's coming back, good. And then two associations, the Documentary Filmmaker Association, which is really a big thing. And I want to just maybe ask Thandi to speak about the Documentary Filmmaker Association and the South African Guild of Editors. I think editing in a story in doc is even more important, especially I think, Mathieu, you said on Friday to me that you're seeing a lot more people look at archive documentary to get quick to market, to just tell these stories when they're allowed to go out and shoot. So the use of editing is fantastic. And of course we have Electric South and the Center for Film and Media Studies. I think that's at the university. We were just going through the roster of sponsors, Thandi, while we waited for you. Over to you, please.
Yeah. What I missed that. My interwebs went down for a couple of minutes or so. You're asking me to respond to? Sorry.
We're still on the benefit of the business model and what might be coming. You kind of started that round, and so I sort of said, what do you think are the importance of associations at this time? When you want to work collaboratively as a documentary filmmaker, you want to work with your board and your fellow documentarians to look at a way forward as an industry. And you've got two associations that are seen as sponsors of this festival or on the sponsors page, including DFA and SAGE. Are you on the Exco for DFA at the moment, Thandi?
No, I'm not. I'm on the IPO. So I didn't select for DFO. I'm independent producers organization, the deputy chair there. So I'm not really sure how the space for DFA is working in terms of doc, but I think most producers are trying to find ways of being collaborative and working in spaces where we learn from each other. I know that, as a sector and as an industry, we've had to work closely together to make sure we've gotten our COVID protocols into place, to make sure that our sector could get back to work at level 4, as opposed to the creative sectors who can only really get back to work round about now. We've had to work very hard and collaboratively to ensure we could get back to work and to ensure that we were back on set and we could start filming again as soon as we could. And we're still having to work hard. I mean, one of the key things that's missing for all of us is the fact that we can't get insured for COVID. So we're sitting with a lot of productions who would be back on set and be out filming if there are documentary filmmakers who can't get covered for insurance because of COVID. So there's a lot of problems that we're sitting with if you funded and if you're getting money through any of the rebates. You held up there, you held up here, you held up there. And the key thing for us as a sector and as an industry, whether we are on the narrative side or on the documentary side, is is how we're going to go about getting those insurance on board. Specifically, we're not commissioned, you know, and I think with most docs, you don't come as a commission. I think it's a very new thing all of a sudden to have a platform say, go ahead and do a 6-part documentary series. It's not the way it works. Having worked for Nat Geo, it was very formatted and a very structured way of what was bought and commissioned from their perspective. So for most documentary filmmakers, we don't have the opportunities to get those commissions. We're having to do this out of the love of doing it. And now there are a fair number of problems that are put in there. So how do we start working together and learning from each other how to get out there and film without, you know, taking these roadblocks into consideration moving forward?
Thanks, Thandi. There is a question here from Facebook. Someone is agreeing with Mathieu on the need for IT for online platforms are expensive, and how can international markets maintain the democratization of the space in the future for filmmakers from the global south? But just think about that question for a bit. I want Brian to just follow up on a little bit about what you said, and then we'll go to Mathieu. He can answer that question, please. And over to you.
I'm sorry, what was the question? I had some problems with my internet, so I missed part of that. Apologies.
So we were looking at specifically how Mathieu, when he mentioned the expense of online platforms and needing to price things accordingly, how can international markets maintain the democratization of the space in the future for filmmakers from the global south? And I thought maybe you could add to that before he ties it in a bow and answers everything.
Well, I think Mathieu will have the best answers for that. But what I'm really interested in is something that Mathieu had brought up before as well, which is the importance of the more informal meetings and the kind of things that aren't part of the official meetings of all these markets. You know, I was thinking just while we were speaking that one of my clients is actually based in South Africa, a documentary production company that I work with on branded content stuff. And the only reason we met was because the South African government paid for them to come to IFA in Amsterdam. But we didn't meet in an official meeting. We met at a bar just by chance, and then, you know, got to know each other over beers and then further conversations. And it's those informal opportunities, especially for people who aren't already connected. And so I think that one piece of the answer to this question is, how do the markets around the world that have the funding, the bigger markets like Sunnyside and IDFA and CPH Docs, how do we make sure that filmmakers from the global south and from other underrepresented countries are not only able to participate, but are able to start to build these kind of more informal networks? How do we duplicate that in an online world? I don't have the answer. I think we're still figuring that out, but it's going to be very important because it's those chance meetings and encounters that end up changing your career or changing the trajectory of your film. And that's something we need to really focus on as we move into this kind of hybrid space.
Thanks, Brian. So now the man with all the answers.
I wish I had all the answers. No, I think the how will be up to each individual festival. Just to give you an example, at Sunnyside, we started last year to have some grants for up-and-coming producers from Eastern and Central Europe. That was part of a deal we had with Creative Europe, which supports the market. The same could apply for filmmakers from the South and the global South. So the how is a technical question. All I know is that I think it's really the festivals and markets' responsibility to include these people, because otherwise they're going to end up dead anyway. If you have a market or a festival only for, you know, the usual suspects and people who are already connected, then you're missing out on something. I mean, I think all the producers, broadcasters, directors, everybody's looking for new voices, for different talents, for different stories. So if you just limit your festival to people who would normally come anyway, who have their network, I think you're going to end up fairly high and dry, because you need to make sure that you have a renewal of talents attending your event from different countries, from different perspectives, different voices. So the how is just a matter of making sure that you are convinced it is important, and then you'll find the financing. Our response will not be the same as IFAS response or Encounter's response. Everybody will have a different response, but I think it's a crucial element to make sure that we include different voices.
So we normally had this as a 2-hour session because we didn't know how these online sessions work, but we did talk about the fact that it might run a little shorter. We do have another question here. And I want to start bringing in the end of this session. Just as you're talking, what haven't we thought about? What questions haven't we asked? I mean, the importance of documentary, especially during COVID time when there's so much fake news out there. We didn't even touch on that yet. And we need these deep documentaries, these deep dives. Otherwise, the world is just going to believe all the noise. And but there is a question here. How do markets, or how can markets, distributors and broadcasters make themselves more accessible to filmmakers and producers through these online platforms? And I think the hopeful thing that Mathieu said earlier was that some people were taking meetings that they couldn't have before. And in my own experience, you can sometimes attend a session that you normally wouldn't have taken the chance to, because either it would be sold out, or you would be booking back-to-back meetings. You couldn't get across to the event in time. So there are kind of advantages, but is there any way we can force people to make themselves more accessible? That's around on this question. And then don't forget to add ideas and questions for each other, maybe, that we haven't had a chance to say. So I'm going to jump over.
Sorry, I didn't hear you, Monica. Who's supposed to answer first?
THANDI, she's going now. Thanks, Mathieu.
Okay. I think there's look, I think even in a live environment and space, connecting with broadcasters and distributors can be difficult at the best of times. They're kind of unicorns for most producers. So how we get them to engage online is of course going to be the next question, and the difficult question. I do think it's going to have to be, it's very targeted and structured in terms of how broadcasters are engaged. They've got to see value, and they've got to understand that a festival or a market is bringing the right type of producer and the right type of story to them. I've sat on both sides of this. I've been to a market as a broadcaster looking to buy programming, and I've now had to go and pitch programming. And I must say, one of the key things being on the broadcasting side and the distribution side is always that, is this the right forum for me? Are you delivering the right kind of talent to me? It's great to have my name attached and say that I'm here as a broadcaster at this festival, but I'm looking at the projects that the festival is offering me, and they're not the kind of projects that I would normally commission. So I think there needs to be hard work, not just on the term from the market and the festival, to understand that it's not just about getting a name there. It's, if you do get that name there, do you have the kind of projects that are going to speak to that broadcaster or platform? Because if you don't, they're not coming back next year. I'm not going to take my time to fly somewhere, get there, great. It's fantastic to see the ocean. It's fantastic if you're coming to South Africa to go and go to the bush for a couple of days, but I haven't left with anything in my pocket that's worthwhile. So I think that as much as you can ask the producer about where that relationship needs to be, I think it's also a lot of work on the markets and the festival sides to make sure that when you do invite a platform, you do invite a broadcaster, distributor, that you've got the right kind of content for them that's going to interest them and bring them back, and you're finding the right kind of talent to match them. You literally have to be a matchmaker on festivals, and I think some festivals don't necessarily do that, and that may be where the problem sits.
Thanks, THANDI. We're going to go to Brian now, please.
Well, I think that what THANDI just said brings up, we really understand now what we're paying for when we go to these markets, and it's not the great ambiance and the wonderful city, it's the curation that these markets and festivals are doing, so that broadcasters and other distributors know that they are not just getting inundated with everything under the sun, but with the most quality projects. And so that curation is even more important now in a world where there's so much abundance and so many things to try to choose from online. So it's really even more important that we pay and trust these curators at these markets. But I think this virtual world is also opening some opportunities, maybe for some more collaboration around that area. So, maybe markets and festivals in parts of the global South that have good curators, but maybe the buyers at a European country may not know about as well. It's an opportunity for those kind of collaborations where a Sunnyside can collaborate with Encounters to bring in projects they might not have known about before, things like that. So I think it'll be interesting to see, could there be more collaboration around curation to bring more of these projects to broadcasters without inundating them with things they don't really want to see.
Thanks, Brian. Over to you, Mathieu.
Well, I think Brian and Thandi pretty much used the words I was going to use. I mean, curation is very important, and collaboration as well. And we actually at Sunnyside, we started doing that a few years ago, trying to collaborate with various festivals, especially once again in Central and Eastern Europe, because we do have a focus there, because only these festivals know exactly which producers are working on interesting projects for which we can be a platform for the international market. We cannot be everywhere. We cannot have we cannot be on the ground to know the communities in every single country. So working with people who have access to the right talent, I think is key, as Brian was saying. So curation, but also I would add mentoring, making sure that producers who are not as familiar with the market understand exactly why they're going there, how to approach a broadcaster, when to approach a broadcaster, when to approach maybe a fellow producer. Like if you want to co-produce, for instance, with France, you will need at some point a French producer, because only a French producer can access funding from CNC or a funding organization. Also, French broadcasters must invest in independent production in France. So for a French broadcaster to invest directly in a project brought by a foreign producer is almost unthinkable. So these are very simple. I mean, I'm just stating a very simple fact. There's many more things you can teach people who are less familiar with the market before they actually access a festival or a market. Because I know, and I agree with Thandi, I mean, broadcasters don't have that much time, and they hate being approached by people who haven't done their homework. So I think one area where festivals and markets can help is by helping producers basically do their homework and guiding them through the market to make sure that nobody's time is wasted, basically.
Thanks. That's a brilliant summation of how important time is. And we have a question from Liani Mastorp, who is a professor here at UCT. She's saying the panel has noted how challenging networking is at fests, especially for emerging filmmakers. Have any of you seen or can you imagine models for virtual networking at recent markets, festivals, conferences that you think work and are replicable? So I'm going to put up my hand for 2 seconds. We have a very small festival that's gone online this year called StoryScope, and they're doing hot desks where you just force people to go and take meetings, and it's the luck of the draw. We don't know how that's going to work, but last year where we did it in face-to-face, there were lineups down the hall, and you just, after the big session on finance, all those people that were experts took these meetings for a 2-hour session in 10 minutes. And it was just by the luck of the draw. Now it'll be by booking. I'm not sure if that's going to work in a virtual space, but it kind of worked at Annecy for some meetings I had with people. And I think we are looking at those sorts of things. I'm wondering, have you, and Liani is wondering, have you seen any of those kinds of forcing people to meet where it wouldn't be so easy?
I think it's also about the technology, Monica. With DFMI and DFMI as a market goes online, next month. This is one of the discussions we've had to have. How do you have breakaways? Can I pull out of a meeting to have a quick sidebar with someone that I would normally do when I'm in a physical environment? And that goes back to the technology. We've had to, for example, work with a Zoom, work with a so-and-so to try and see, are there ways we can mirror online what behavior is like when you are in a physical environment. But the key thing there is technology. And once again, we go to the cost of how expensive is that and can we afford to do it? But I think as more festivals go online and more of them are working with software designers from the likes of Zoom, that we will find this will become easier as we go ahead, because the technology is being forced to catch up with what our lived reality is at this point.
Brilliant summation there, Thandi. Gentlemen, who wants to go next?
I'll jump in and just say that I think we're all experimenting with ways to do a mix of these kind of curated meetings with the serendipity of just chance encounters and figuring out the right mix so that you're not angering a broadcaster with someone who's not prepared for the meeting, but at the same time mentoring people to be able to get to know the industry. So I think it's, carving out time for people to have kind of that mentorship aspect and really help them learn how to work with the industry, as Mathieu was talking about. I think another thing, though, is just for festivals to remember that a lot of industry are more open to meetings than you may suspect. So I was on the jury for a film festival recently, and after the festival took place, several of the filmmakers reached out to me on LinkedIn for meetings because the festival had never arranged those meetings during the fest. And I was more than willing to do a quick Zoom phone call with those filmmakers that we had given prizes to at the festival. We enjoyed their movies, but the festival had just forgotten to make those introductions. So I think it's just about, sometimes just remembering, hey, some of the things that we would facilitate in real life are very easy to do online. And it doesn't take that much of my time for 30 minutes to meet with a filmmaker that I've given an award to in particular. So it's just remembering that people are open to these meetings as well.
It's a brilliant example. And we're going to do one more round of questions, Mathieu. You're about to add to that. But remember to start bringing in your wrap. And if anything we forgot on this panel, to add your ideas there. But Mathieu, do you want to do both of those? Answer that question. And how do we network more, obviously? And what would you bring in to this conversation that we haven't had yet?
How do we network? That's the main question, I think, for a lot of events. Technology is one thing, I agree with Thandi, but I think it's also a question of making sure that people are available, whether you ask them to set aside an hour a day for chance meetings, because you can have the best technological tools. If people are not there to accept, chance meetings, then it's not going to go anywhere. So I think it's really educating all participants and making sure that they agree to set up a bit of time, not too much, because everybody's time is precious, of course, but people have to do it, and that's. I think once again up to festivals and markets to kind of educate their participants with a new configuration that we have with the online events. Yeah. I think we've covered a lot of ground. I just wanted to add on a very positive note, because we haven't mentioned it, but what's struck me is that since COVID started and lockdown started in many countries, documentaries have been more and more popular. I mean, whether it's on traditional broadcasters or online platforms, more and more people are watching documentaries. I guess it always happens when you have a time of crisis. People need to understand what's going on, but it's not just documentaries related to COVID. I think the genre is getting more and more popular. What struck me as well, reading several studies, it seems that younger people are going into documentary as well. I mean, watching documentaries. We all know that traditional broadcasters have graying figures in terms of their audience. But what's really comforting is that younger audiences seem to like the genre documentary. You see it at different festivals. You see it with results of broadcasters or whether it's a linear airing of programs or non-linear. So I think this is very positive, and I just wanted to end on a positive note that documentary is relevant today, and therefore our events and events like Encounters are very relevant as well.
Brilliant. I love that. Thank you.
And just for me, as a wrap up, is to say to documentary filmmakers that one of the most fascinating things I found is we've had stories in development that we've had to completely re-engineer and rethink, and it's opened up way new ideas. You know, we were going in to tell one story, and then lockdown happened, and people couldn't travel, and it's impacted the story we were telling so greatly. But all of a sudden, we've got new ways of telling stories, and we've had to rethink the story we actually were telling, which has been fascinating. It's meant we've thought more on gender issues because we've had to rethink how we're telling those particular stories. Things that have been thrown up at us through the news has made us sit back and rethink about how we tell our stories. So from that perspective, I think this is also going to be an interesting time, but I think a wonderful time for people to re-engineer how they tell their stories, what stories telling, and who's telling those stories too. You know, as documentary films get out there and you have more people watching, and they be exposed to ideas and thoughts that they didn't know was out there for them because they've had this time to do so, that we'll start finding more interesting stories as we move forward too.
Brian, also maybe mention your online platform and where they can read your thoughts, because we keep talking about your amazing blogs, and THANDI has a beautiful website, so does Sunnyside. But Brian, talk a bit about subgenre as you wrap.
Sure. Well, I just typed in the web address for my website on the chat here. And if you go there, you can click on newsletter, and you'll find all of my writings about these subjects. And one of the things that I wrote about and that I really am thinking about as we speak now is, you know, COVID has been just horrendous and crazy all around. But the positive side of all of this is that it's completely wiped the slate clean. And we really have an opportunity now to rethink everything about the business. And so I think whether you're a film festival, a market, a filmmaker, a producer, whatever your role is, a broadcaster, distributor, now is an opportunity to try completely new things and do things we've never been able to do before, because these kind of opportunities, if we're lucky, only come around once. And it's an opportunity to take advantage of this and try complete new business models and do things that are a little crazy and may not have worked before, because hopefully they'll work now, because the old way wasn't really working all that great to begin with. So now we have an opportunity to build something new.
That's brilliant. And from, I think, all of us here in South Africa, thank you to our guests from France and from America. THANDI, you're a global player. Thank you. And thank you for your film. And Mandisa, Taryn, Cry, all of you at the festival, thank you. And all the people questioning and watching online. Your stories are important. Matthew, you want to say something to say goodbye? Or
No, I was just going to say goodbye, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be on this panel.
Pleasure.
I'll say goodbye, and just please make sure that you go and pay to watch Influence, so that Encounters can get a little bit of cash into their pockets this year. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. And read Brian, and see you all at the next festivals and the rest of this festival. Bye-bye. Thank you.